My name is Marcus. I'm 30 years old, and nothing could have prepared me for the moment I stepped off that plane, dragged my suitcase through my parents' driveway, and realized the garage door was wide open. Yet my 1970 Dodge Challenger, the car I had poured my entire life into, was gone. At first I thought maybe Dad had moved it into storage or taken it for a short spin, though I had begged him never to. But the sight of that empty space hit me like a gut punch. The sunlight spilled across the oil-stained concrete floor, illuminating the exact outline where my car had sat like a chalk trace at a crime scene. My heart hammered. That Challenger wasn't just a car. It was my sanctuary, my proof that years of sacrifice hadn't been in vain, and most of all, my connection to someone I'd loved and lost. I pushed the front door open, barely able to breathe. Mom greeted me with a too bright smile, holding a plate of cookies, as if this were some kind of casual homecoming. "Welcome back, Marcus," she sang. But her eyes flicked toward Dad, who sat stiffly in his recliner. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Where's my car?" I asked, my voice low, almost a growl. They exchanged a glance, that silent, parental signal I'd grown up resenting. Then Mom tilted her chin, that familiar move she always used when she was about to justify the unjustifiable. "Thanks to your car?" she said with a smirk. "Your sister is finally having the time of her life." For a moment I couldn't even process it. My suitcase slipped from my hand, thudding against the floor. The words didn't make sense. My sister. The car. I laughed, a hollow, disbelieving sound, because what else could I do? That's when Mom snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. "What's so funny, Marcus? Do you think this is a joke? Do you—" No, this was no joke. This was betrayal in its rawest form. And before I tell you what happened next, I need to pause here. Because maybe you've been in my shoes, maybe not with a car, but with something that was yours, something you earned only to have family act like it belonged to them. That feeling of your boundaries being bulldozed as if they were nothing. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the heart of what I'm about to share. I remember standing in that living room, my chest tight, the smell of cookies and floor polish sickening. The weight of years of favoritism, of always being the strong one, while my sister Lily was coddled and shielded, crashed over me in a single devastating realization they had crossed a line they could never uncross. And yet here's the strangest part. That emptiness in the garage. It wasn't just about losing a car. It was about losing the last illusion I'd held on to, that maybe my parents would one day see me as equal to my sister. Instead, I saw the truth staring back at me in their guilty eyes. They had sold my dream. They had sold my freedom. They had sold a piece of me. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. Deep down, I already knew this wasn't just about a car. This was about power control and a pattern of betrayal that stretched back years. And if I was going to survive what came next, I had to finally decide where I stood. Because family can take from you only as long as you let them. I stood there staring at my mother, my chest burning with disbelief. The words, "Thanks to your car, your sister is finally having the time of her life," kept echoing inside my head like a cruel refrain. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but instead I froze, my throat tight, my mind buzzing. She must have seen the confusion in my eyes, because she leaned closer and hissed, "Marcus, don't make a scene. You've always had so much, it's time you let Lily have something." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my gaze. That's when I turned away from them, toward you, the people watching, listening to my story right now. Because maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe you've had something precious taken from you, not by a stranger, but by family. If you've ever had relatives act like your possessions, your achievements, even your boundaries were theirs to play with, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And if this story is hitting close to home, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. I didn't wait for their answers. I turned back to my parents, forcing my voice to stay level. "What exactly did you do?" I asked. Mom didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone, flicked through her gallery, and shoved the screen in my face. And there she was, Lily, my younger sister, smiling in designer sunglasses, lounging on a cruise ship deck with a cocktail in her manicured hand. Hashtags about the Mediterranean sunshine and freedom filled the captions. The sight made my stomach churn. All those hours I had sacrificed, all the weekends I'd spent working double shifts, all the nights I'd chosen exhaustion over comfort. And this is what they did with it. Sold my dream so she could sip mojitos in the Aegean Sea. I laughed again, but this time it wasn't from disbelief. It was from rage, the kind that bubbles up so hot you can barely contain it. You sold my car, I whispered, more to myself than to them. Dad finally looked up. His voice was soft, pleading. Marcus, try to understand. Lily's been under a lot of stress at work. All her friends were going on this cruise and she didn't want to be left behind. We thought this trip would help her career, her confidence. It was an opportunity. An opportunity, I snapped. You sold something that wasn't yours to give. You stole from me. Mom rolled her eyes, that sharp, dismissive gesture I'd known since childhood. Oh, please. It's just a car. You're successful, Marcus. You make good money. You can always buy another one. But your sister, she needed this. She needed to be part of something, to feel included. And that right there cut deeper than anything else. Because in that moment, I realized my parents didn't see my car as a treasure. They didn't see it as 5 years of sacrifice, sweat, and discipline. To them, it was disposable, a resource they could shuffle around to support the fragile one, the golden child, at my expense. I remember gripping the edge of the coffee table so tightly my knuckles turned white. My voice came out low, dangerous. That Challenger wasn't just a car. It was my promise to myself. It was Grandpa's legacy. And you threw it away like it meant nothing. For the first time, Dad's face faltered, guilt flickering across his features. But Mom. She stayed stone cold. Family matters more than material things, she said. Lily is family. She needed this. Don't be so dramatic. Dramatic. That was always her word for me whenever I dared to demand fairness. Whenever I pointed out the imbalance, whenever I refused to quietly accept less. I straightened up, forcing myself not to explode. Because something inside me was shifting, crystallizing. This wasn't just about a car. This was about a pattern that stretched back decades. A pattern I was about to expose not only to them, but to you watching. Because here's the truth, sometimes the people closest to you can betray you in ways strangers never could. And as I locked eyes with my mother's unyielding stare, I made a silent vow. This time I wouldn't back down. This time they'd learn that my boundaries weren't suggestions. This was only the beginning. When I was 7 years old, my world didn't revolve around cartoons or video games like other kids in my neighborhood. My world lived in a dimly lit garage that smelled of motor oil and old wood. That garage belonged to my grandfather, Henry. Every Saturday morning, while my friends begged their parents for sugary cereal and television time, Grandpa would rumble up in his rusty Ford pickup, honk twice, and wave me over with his grease-stained hands. I'd scramble into the passenger seat, barely tall enough to see over the dash, my heart pounding with excitement, because I knew what awaited us. The garage wasn't just a workshop, it was a sanctuary. Dust floated in golden beams of sunlight, settling over shelves stacked with wrenches, carburetors, and old manuals. Each tool had a story, each scar on the concrete floor told of some project long completed. And in the center, like a holy relic, rested his pride and joy, a 1970 Dodge Challenger painted in blazing plum, crazy purple, its chrome gleaming even under layers of dust. To me, that car was alive. Machines have souls, Marcus Grandpa would say, crouching beside me as he guided my small fingers to hold a ratchet. If you respect them, if you care for them, they'll carry your spirit long after you're gone. His voice was gravelly calm, but full of conviction. I believed every word. Week by week he showed me more. How to drain oil without spilling a drop. How to listen for the faint tick of a loose valve. How to feel the hum of an engine with your palm pressed against the hood. While other kids were learning dance steps or chasing baseballs, I was learning to hear the heartbeat of steel and gasoline. The first time he let me sit in the driver's seat, I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. The leather was cracked warm under my hands, and the scent of gasoline mixed with something sweeter like freedom itself. I whispered to myself, one day I'll have one just like this. That wasn't a dream, that was a vow. My parents, of course, never understood. My mom would sigh every time I came home with grease smudged on my arms. Why can't you take ballet like Lily? She'd mutter, shaking her head as though my passion was some kind of flaw. My father would just grunt, burying his disappointment in silence. They wanted me refined, polished, predictable. But Grandpa, he saw me. He called me the driver. He said I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty, that I had grit. I can still hear the scrape of his boots against the concrete, the clink of wrenches being set down, the warmth of his chuckle when I managed to fix something on my own. Those Saturdays were the only time I felt completely free, completely myself. Years later, after Grandpa passed away, that garage became a memory, but the promise I made in it stayed etched in my bones. I swore that no matter what it took, no matter how many hours I had to work, no matter how much I had to sacrifice, I would one day own my own Challenger. Not just any car, but the car a symbol of his belief in me and of my determination to carve my own road. It wasn't about horsepower. It wasn't about showing off. It was about legacy. Every bolt I tightened with him, every story he told about long road trips across the Midwest, every speck of dust that clung to my jeans when I crawled under that chassis, it all built into one truth: cars weren't just metal. They were memories, promises, proof that something lasting could come from a life of sweat and persistence. So when my mother dismissed my Challenger as just a car, she wasn't only erasing 5 years of sacrifice. She was erasing him. Erasing the Saturdays where a little boy learned to believe in himself, even when his parents didn't. Standing in my parents' living room that day, seeing their smug justifications, I realized they never understood why the car mattered. But I knew you would. Because maybe you have something like that too, an object that carries someone's voice, someone's spirit long after they're gone. That's why losing it isn't about the thing. It's about losing the promise it carries. And that's why I wasn't going to let this betrayal slide. Growing up in my parents' house was like living in two separate worlds, one built for me and another far shinier built for Lily. From the outside, we looked like the perfect suburban family. But if you peeled back the curtain, you'd see the imbalance etched into every holiday, every birthday, every decision my parents made. Take birthdays, for example. When Lily turned 16, the house was packed wall to wall with her friends. Streamers hung from the ceiling, music pulsed from rented speakers, and in the driveway sat her brand new Honda Civic wrapped in a giant red bow. Everyone clapped as she squealed, running into Mom's arms like it was the happiest day of her life. 2 years earlier, when I turned 16, my party was a half-eaten sheet cake from the grocery store and a card with $20 inside. Dad muttered something about saving for college, and Mom gave me that tight smile she always wore when she felt guilty, but didn't want to admit it. That was it. No car, no music, no celebration. The pattern stretched into every corner of our lives. Lily wanted ballet lessons instantly approved at the most expensive studio in town. I asked for auto shop classes. Mom scoffed. We can't afford unnecessary extras this year. Lily wanted designer clothes for her first day of high school done. I was handed a pile of her cast-offs, told to make them work. And the thing is, I didn't hate Lily. I couldn't. She was my little sister. She didn't ask for the pedestal they placed her on. But every indulgence she received only highlighted what I didn't. And every time I tried to call it out, Mom's voice came sharp. Stop being dramatic, Marcus. You're the strong one. You don't need all that. That phrase, the strong one, became their excuse for everything. It wasn't admiration. It was justification. They convinced themselves that because I could endure more, I should endure more. That because I didn't cry or demand, I didn't deserve. I remember one winter when our heater broke. Dad sighed about the cost of repairs, and Mom panicked about Lily catching cold before her big recital. Guess whose room the space heater went into? I spent that week curled under blankets, my breath fogging the air while Lily's room stayed cozy. When I asked about it, Mom said, Marcus, you can handle it. Your sister can't. Those words stung deeper than the chill in my bones. It wasn't just about possessions. It was about value. To them, Lily was fragile crystal that had to be protected at all costs. I was cast iron, useful, durable, expected to withstand anything without breaking. But even cast iron cracks under enough pressure. And in those moments, when I saw Lily twirl in her new costumes while I wiped grease off my hands from after-school shifts at the gas station, a quiet fire started to burn in me. I told myself I wouldn't wait for their approval. I wouldn't rely on their support. If I wanted something, if I wanted that car, I'd get it myself. That's the thing about favoritism. It can crush you, or it can forge you. And while Lily learned that someone would always rescue her, I learned that no one would. If I wanted to be seen, I'd have to make myself undeniable. So when I stood in that living room years later, listening to my mother dismiss the Challenger as just a car, and my father plead about Lily's feelings, All those memories surged back like a tidal wave. The birthday with the sheet cake, the hand-me-down jeans, the frozen nights without heat. Every single slight lined up like dominoes leading straight to this moment of betrayal. And I realized something sharp and painful: they hadn't changed. The scales had always been tipped, and they always would be unless I forced them to see it. That car was more than a machine. It was proof that despite every stacked deck, I had carved out something for myself. And by selling it for Lily's comfort, they weren't just stealing metal and rubber, they were stealing the only balance I'd ever managed to create. But they didn't know one thing: what they sold wasn't what they thought it was. And that truth, still burning at the edges of my tongue, would soon turn everything upside down. The night after the argument about the car, I sat awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed outside my window. My parents thought they had won. They believed they had finally closed the book on my defiance by ripping away the one thing that embodied my independence. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the Challenger wasn't just a car to me. It was leverage. I had kept meticulous records of every dollar I'd spent restoring it, every receipt for parts, every bill of sale, every photograph of me working under its hood. That garage wasn't just a shrine to my grandfather. It was also an archive of my determination. And I knew one day those records might matter. But what kept me awake that night wasn't just the paperwork. It was the memory of my parents' faces, calm, smug, as if they'd done something noble. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd justified it, cloaked it in the same tired excuse they'd always used. "We're just looking out for Lily." I clenched my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. For years I had swallowed their favoritism, convinced myself that enduring quietly was the only way forward. But this was too far. They had taken something that could never be replaced. And I realized I had a choice: either let them write the ending of this story, or take the pen back into my own hands. The next morning I drove to their house. The driveway was empty. Lily must have taken her new SUV to brunch or some ballet rehearsal. I parked across the street, clutching the folder of receipts, photographs, and documents I'd gathered. My pulse thundered in my ears as I rehearsed what I'd say. When Mom opened the door, she looked startled. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft but wary. "This isn't a good time." I pushed past her into the living room, the same place where they had dismissed my fury days earlier. Dad sat in his recliner, sipping coffee, looking annoyed at the intrusion. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but sharp. I laid the folder on the coffee table with a thud. "Do you see this? Every hour I worked, every dime I spent, every cut and bruise I earned restoring that Challenger, it's all here. That car wasn't yours to sell. It was mine." Dad sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Marcus, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Your sister needed help, and we—" "Stop," I snapped. My voice cracked through the room like a whip. "This isn't about Lily needing help. This is about you deciding again that what I need doesn't matter. You've been doing it my whole life, and now you've crossed the line." For the first time, Mom's composure faltered. She looked at the folder, then at me, her eyes darting nervously. We thought you'd understand. You're strong, Marcus. You always bounce back." There it was, the old refrain, the knife twisted with a smile. I leaned forward, my voice low and deliberate. "Being strong doesn't mean being disposable. And I'm done being disposable." They were silent. The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Dad's face. "And here's where I need to pause and ask you something. What would you have done? If your parents sold something that carried the spirit of the only person who ever truly believed in you, would you forgive them, or would you finally draw the line? Tell me in the comments below, because I want to know if I'm alone in this or if you'd have fought the way I did. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about reclaiming my voice. I left that day without a resolution, but I left with something more powerful: a decision. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, I'd show them just how much I did. They thought selling the Challenger was the end of the story. They didn't realize it was only the beginning. The days after that confrontation felt like walking through smoke, thick, choking, and impossible to ignore. My parents avoided me, pretending the issue would evaporate if they stayed silent long enough. But silence had never been more dangerous, because it gave me time to think, to plan, and to let the fire inside me grow. At work, I kept my head down, turning wrenches at the garage where I'd been saving every extra penny. Customers came and went, their engines roaring back to life under my hands, and I thought about the Challenger, how I had coaxed life back into it the same way. They hadn't just sold a car. They had sold the proof of who I was becoming. And then came the phone call. Lily. Marcus? She chirped, her voice bright and oblivious. Thanks for helping out. Mom and Dad said it was your idea to let them sell the old car so I could get something reliable. I really appreciate it. My chest tightened. My idea, I gripped the phone so hard it nearly cracked. You think I wanted that, I hissed. You think I'd ever give up the only thing I built with my own hands for you? There was silence on the other end. Then her voice, small and defensive. Well, they said you didn't care about it as much as I care about my future. They said you agreed. That was the moment I knew the truth. They weren't just thieves. They were liars. They had rewritten the story, painting me as selfless and Lily as grateful while erasing my anger completely. And Lily believed them. When I hung up, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt erased. That night, I pulled the folder back out. The receipts, the photographs, the documentation, it was all there, neat and undeniable. And for the first time, I realized what it really represented, not just my claim to the Challenger, but my claim to myself. Proof that I existed beyond their narrative. Proof that I mattered. So I started making copies. One set went into a safe deposit box at the bank, another I stored at work, and a third I kept tucked in my backpack. If my parents wanted to bury me under lies, I'd make sure the truth was unshakable. But even as I planned, doubt crept in. Would anyone even care? Would people really see the injustice, or would they just shrug and say, "It's just family business"? That's when I realized something. If I wanted the truth to matter, I had to make people care. So here's where I pause and ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have gone public with the truth or kept it buried to preserve the fragile image of family? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I need to know, would you have stayed silent or fought back? The next morning, I called Lily. This time, my voice was calm, deliberate. Meet me for coffee, just you and me. She agreed, and when she showed up wrapped in designer clothes my parents had bought her, she looked more like their golden child than ever. She smiled, expecting brotherly warmth. But instead of a hug, I slid the folder across the table. "Read it," I said. Her brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages, receipts with my name on them. Time-stamped photos of me bent under the hood, the original bill of sale signed in my hand. Slowly her smile faltered. This can't be," she whispered. "It is," I cut in. "And Mom and Dad knew it. They lied to you, Lily. They didn't sell their car, they sold mine. And they told you I agreed because it was easier than admitting they'd robbed me." For once she had no words. Her perfect, untouchable world tilted just enough to let a crack in. As I watched her, I realized something. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about breaking the illusion my parents had built brick by brick. And if Lily's shock was the first brick to fall, then so be it. Because the tower they had built of lies, favoritism, and control was about to come crashing down. When Lily left the cafe that day, folder clutched in her hands like it was burning her fingers, I thought I might finally get some peace. But peace doesn't come easy when you've just cracked open years of lies. By the time I walked back to my truck, I could already imagine what was happening. Lily storming home, confronting Mom and Dad, their voices rising as they scrambled to explain. Sure enough, that night my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "We need to talk, tomorrow. Our house. Be there." I stared at the screen, jaw tight. No apology. No acknowledgement of what I'd shown Lily. Just another command, like I was still a child who owed them obedience. But I wasn't a child anymore. The next morning I drove over. The air was thick with tension even before I walked through the front door. Mom sat stiffly on the couch, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Dad stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid like a general preparing for battle. And Lily. She sat in the corner, eyes red, flipping through the folder again and again, as though searching for a page that would make it all untrue. "Marcus," Dad began, his tone sharp. "You've embarrassed this family, airing dirty laundry to your sister like we're criminals. You had no right." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "No right, you sold my car, you lied to Lily, and now I'm the problem." Mom's voice cracked in. "We did what we thought was best. You've always been able to handle disappointment. Lily, she's fragile." There it was. The excuse they had been singing since we were kids. Lily was fragile. Lily needed protection. And I was the punching bag, the sacrificial lamb. I stepped closer, locking eyes with my father. You've mistaken endurance for indifference. Just because I survived your neglect doesn't mean I was okay with it. I was silent, but I wasn't blind. And I'm not silent anymore. For a moment, the room was dead quiet. Then Lily's voice broke through. Is it true? She whispered, her gaze flicking between them. Did you really sell it without telling him? Did you really say it was his idea? Mom looked away. Dad's jaw clenched. Their silence was all the answer Lily needed. She stood, her face pale. All my life you told me Marcus didn't care, that he was fine being left behind. But you've been lying to me, haven't you, about him? About everything. The anger in her voice startled even me. For once Lily wasn't their golden child. She was a daughter betrayed. Dad slammed his hand against the mantel. Enough, we are your parents. Everything we've done has been for this family. I shook my head slowly. No. Everything you've done has been for control, and I'm done living under it. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Here's where I need to pause and ask you, the ones listening to this. Would you have stayed and fought harder, trying to force your parents to change? Or would you have walked away the moment you realized they'd never see you as anything but expendable? Tell me in the comments below, because I'm curious if you think blood should bind you no matter the cost, or if there's a point where you cut the cord. That day, I walked out of their house with nothing but my backpack. No apology followed me, no footsteps of reconciliation, just silence. But it wasn't the silence of guilt this time, it was the silence of a battle line drawn. I knew the fight wasn't over. If anything, it had only begun. My parents weren't the kind to back down quietly. And now that Lily had seen the truth, they would do everything they could to twist it back into their favor. But here's the thing about lies. Once the mask slips, you can never unsee the face beneath it. And as I drove away, I realized for the first time I wasn't afraid. Because the family I thought I was losing, maybe I'd never really had it to begin with. I thought walking out of that house would feel like freedom, but the truth is, it felt like stepping into a storm. For a while, the silence that followed lulled me into thinking my parents might let things go. But deep down, I knew them too well. They'd never accept being exposed, never accept losing control of the story. It started with whispers. Old family friends stopped returning my calls. Neighbors gave me strange looks when I drove by. At first I brushed it off until one morning at the diner where I grabbed breakfast, I overheard two men muttering at the counter. Shame about Marcus, one said. Yeah, stealing from his own parents, the other replied, shaking his head. The coffee nearly slipped out of my hands. Stealing. That's when I knew the campaign had begun. My parents weren't just denying what they'd done. They were rewriting me into the villain. I walked outside, heart pounding, and called Lily. Did you hear what they're saying? I asked. Her voice trembled. I've heard some of it. They told people you forged those receipts, that you faked the photos. They're telling everyone you've always been jealous of me. I leaned against my truck, rage boiling in my chest. So now I'm a liar too. Lily's silence said it all. She wanted to believe me, but years of their conditioning still hung heavy around her neck. That night, I sat in my apartment, the folder of evidence spread out before me like a shield. My parents were powerful in the small town we lived in. They had money, reputation, connections. I had nothing but the truth and my stubborn will. But then a thought hit me. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs light. So I made a decision. If they wanted to paint me as a thief, I'd show the world what really happened. I scanned every receipt, every photo, and uploaded them to a private drive. I drafted a letter detailing the betrayal, the lies, the favoritism. And I sent it not to neighbors, not to family friends, but to the local paper. The next morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Strangers offered support. And while some still doubted, the evidence spoke louder than my parents' whispers. But the cost was immediate. My father showed up at the garage where I worked, his face red with fury. You think you've won? He spat, jabbing a finger into my chest. You've humiliated this family. Do you really think anyone will hire a mechanic who trashes his own blood? I stood tall, meeting his glare. I don't need your approval anymore. The truth stands on its own. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. He wasn't used to me fighting back, wasn't used to me standing taller than his shadow. And here's where I want to pause and ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have gone public and risked everything, or stayed silent to protect the so-called family name? Share your thoughts in the comments because this choice is one I still wrestle with even now. That night, as I sat alone, I realized something profound. The car, the Challenger it had always been, about more than just horsepower and chrome. It was about ownership of my story. My parents could sell the metal, but they couldn't sell the blood and sweat I poured into it. And now, by telling the truth, I was reclaiming something far bigger than a car. I was reclaiming myself. But storms don't end so easily. The more the truth spread, the more desperate my parents became. And I could sense it, the real battle hadn't even started yet. Because when people who thrive on control start losing it, that's when they become most dangerous. The day the article hit the newsstand, I braced myself for impact. I expected anger backlash, maybe even threats. What I didn't expect was silence. For 2 whole days, my parents said nothing. No calls, no messages, no sudden appearances at my work. The quiet was eerie, like standing in the eye of a hurricane, knowing the walls of wind were about to slam back in. On the 3rd night, the storm broke. I came home from work and found a letter slipped under my apartment door. It wasn't in an envelope, just a single page with my father's heavy handwriting scrawled across it. You've made a mistake, one you can't take back. Families forgive, strangers don't. Think about where you want to stand when the dust settles. No signature, no apology, just a warning disguised as wisdom. I folded the page slowly, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the realization of what was coming. My parents had always fought in shadows, whispers, manipulations, subtle digs at my character. But this was different. This was them promising escalation. And they didn't waste time proving it. The following week, a police officer showed up at my job. Someone had reported missing tools from the shop, accusing me of theft. The officer was polite, almost apologetic, but the damage was done. My boss looked at me with suspicion I hadn't earned. I knew who was behind it. I drove straight to Lily's house that evening, still in my grease-stained coveralls. She answered the door with a tired look. They've been calling me too, she said before I even spoke. Telling me to cut ties, saying you're dragging me down with you. I leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion heavy in my bones. And what do you believe, Lily? She hesitated. I want to believe you, but they're our parents. I can't just erase that. Her words cut deeper than any rumor. I realized then that truth alone wasn't enough. People cling to their stories, their illusions, even when the evidence is staring them in the face. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the folder again, the same folder that had set everything in motion. And I knew this wasn't just about exposing lies anymore. It was about survival. About proving not just to others, but to myself, that I wasn't the weak, expendable son they painted me to be. Here's where I'll be real with you, because if you've been with me this far, you deserve honesty. I didn't know what my next move was. Should I take them to court? Should I cut all ties and disappear? Or should I fight fire with fire, gathering every scrap of proof and showing the world just how deep their betrayal went? And that's when it hit me. I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my name. But here's the kicker, and this is what I want you to sit with until the next part. Just as I was planning my next step, something happened that none of us expected. A twist that would rip everything wide open, forcing even Lily to finally choose a side. I can't tell you what it was yet, not here, not now. But trust me, it changed everything. So, before we dive into that moment, let me ask you, if your own parents turned the world against you, what would you do? Would you run, fight, or forgive? Leave me your thoughts, because your answers might just reveal how the rest of this story will hit you. As I folded my father's letter again and slid it into the folder, I whispered to myself, this isn't over. And deep down, I knew the real war hadn't even started. The twist came on a gray Saturday morning, the kind of day where the clouds hang low like a warning. I was drinking burnt diner coffee when my phone buzzed. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line froze me in place, evidence you haven't seen. I opened it, heart pounding. Attached were scanned documents, bank transfers, property deeds, even hospital bills, all in my parents' names, all pointing to years of financial cover-ups I had never uncovered. The sender had signed only one word, anonymous. I stared at the screen, shaking. My first thought was, it's a trap. My second thought, this is bigger than I ever imagined. That night, I spread the papers across my kitchen table like a detective in a crime drama. One document stopped me cold, a hospital invoice. It listed charges for Lily, charges tied to a medical condition I never knew she had as a child. But my parents had billed those expenses under my name. They hadn't just stolen my car. They'd stolen my identity, my credit, maybe even my future. I called Lily immediately. "Did you know about this?" I asked, my voice breaking. She hesitated. I thought you knew. Dad said it was just easier to file everything under you because you were the older one. I didn't think it mattered." I slammed my fist on the table. It mattered, Lily. It ruined my credit before I even turned 18. Every loan rejection, every suspicious look from a bank, it wasn't bad luck. It was them. She whispered, "Marcus, I didn't realize." I wanted to scream, but I caught myself. This wasn't about blaming her. It was about exposing them. Over the next week, I pieced everything together. The missing money, the fake stories, the way they painted me as reckless while polishing Lily as their golden child. It was a machine built to protect their image, their finances, their control. And I had just uncovered its blueprints. But there was danger in holding this knowledge. The anonymous sender wasn't some good Samaritan. I could feel it in my gut. Someone wanted me to use this, but why, and what would it cost me if I did? The weight of it pressed down on me. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd sit awake replaying every moment of my childhood through a new lens. The lost receipts, the times Dad said, "Don't worry about it. Marcus will take care of it," the way Mom always looked at me with disappointment even when I hadn't done anything wrong. It all made sense now. And yet one question gnawed at me. Why now? Why send this to me? One evening, as I sat staring at the files again, my phone buzzed. A blocked number this time. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I had to. A man's voice crackled on the line, low, deliberate. "Now you see the truth. They're not just liars. They're criminals, and you're the only one who can bring them down." I froze. "Who is this?" He didn't answer directly. "Check page 6 of the deeds. Look at the signature. It's not your father's handwriting. You'll know what to do." Then the line went dead. I rushed to the table, flipping through the documents until I found the page, and my blood ran cold. The signature wasn't my father's. It was mine. My name forged in careful strokes. They hadn't just used me, they'd impersonated me. I sank into my chair, head in my hands. The car, the lies, the whispers, suddenly, it all looked small compared to this. I wasn't just the scapegoat in their family drama. I was the fall guy for a crime. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a story about a stolen car anymore. This was a war over my identity, my freedom, maybe even my future. But the scariest part, I wasn't sure if I was ready for the cost of fighting back. Would you have the courage to go all the way knowing your own parents forged your name to protect themselves? Tell me, because the next step I was about to take would either save me or destroy me. When I discovered the forged signature, something inside me broke, and something else hardened. For years, I'd been the scapegoat, the easy target. But this wasn't just family betrayal anymore. This was fraud, and fraud had consequences. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the folder open, the forged deed staring back at me. My parents hadn't just stolen a car or twisted stories, they had deliberately tied me to their crimes. If anything came to light, I would be the one wearing handcuffs. By sunrise, I made a decision. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. The first step was information. I took the documents to a friend of mine, Derek, who worked as a paralegal downtown. He wasn't the kind of guy you'd usually ask for favors, but I needed someone who understood the legal system. He leafed through the papers, slowly, eyebrows rising higher with each page. Finally, he set them down. "Marcus, this isn't small. We're talking about felony-level fraud, property, medical billing, financial manipulation. If even half of this sticks, your parents could face prison." Hearing those words out loud hit me like a punch. Prison. My parents. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt hollow. I rubbed my temples. What happens to me if I go public with this? Derek leaned back, choosing his words carefully. "They'll fight you. They'll smear you harder than ever. They'll make you look unstable, ungrateful, maybe even complicit. But with this much evidence, if you play it right, you can clear your name, maybe even sue." The thought of suing my parents felt surreal, but maybe surreal was all I had left. That night I called Lily again. My voice was steadier this time. "I have proof, Lil. They forged my name. They've been using me as their cover for years, and I'm done." She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "Marcus, if you do this, you'll destroy them." I swallowed. "No, Lily, they destroyed themselves. I'm just done being the shield." For the first time, she didn't argue. That silence told me she finally saw it too. Over the next week, I laid out my plan. I'd document everything: copies of the forged deeds, the bank transfers, the medical bills. I'd keep originals locked away with duplicates hidden in 3 separate places. If they tried to erase me, erase the proof, there'd always be a backup. But I also knew this wasn't just about evidence. It was about narrative. Whoever controlled the story would control the outcome. And my parents, they were masters of narrative. So I prepared mine. Not the sob story of a son wronged by his family, but the clear, undeniable truth of a man reclaiming his identity. Here's the thing, though, I wasn't naive. I knew the moment I made my move, the backlash would be brutal. And I knew I couldn't do it alone. Which is why, right here, I'm going to pause and speak to you directly. If you've ever felt cornered, gaslit, or painted as the villain in your own story, don't stay silent. Speak, document, share. And if you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's the only way we fight back against the silence. By the end of that week, I was ready. Derek had connected me with a journalist who specialized in white-collar crime. She agreed to meet me off the record to hear my side. I remember walking into that coffee shop, clutching the folder so tightly my knuckles went white. I half expected my parents to burst through the door and drag me out. But instead, there she was, calm, professional pen already poised. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. And as the words spilled out, I felt the weight lift, not entirely, but enough to breathe. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving their lies. I was dismantling them. But here's the part that still haunts me, even as I handed over the copies. Even as I felt the power shift in my favor, a part of me wondered if I was underestimating them. Because people like my parents don't surrender. They retaliate. And I had just declared war. The day after I met with the journalist, I felt lighter than I had in years. But relief doesn't last long when you're up against people who've made manipulation their second language. By Monday morning, the retaliation began. It started small old neighbors suddenly messaging me saying they'd heard concerning things. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years posted a long, tearful rant online about how I was turning on the people who raised me. My inbox filled with accusations: lazy, selfish, bitter. It was the same smear campaign my parents had always used, just louder, public, and far more strategic. At first I laughed bitterly. They're scared, I told myself. This means I'm winning. But by Wednesday it wasn't funny. That morning I walked into work and felt the shift immediately. Coworkers avoided eye contact. My boss called me into her office, face pinched. On her desk sat a printed email, anonymous, of course. It accused me of embezzling company funds, of being under investigation for fraud. My stomach dropped. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but this is serious. Until we sort this out, I have to put you on administrative leave." Just like that, my income evaporated. I staggered home numb, and waiting for me on my doorstep was an envelope. Inside, copies of the very documents I thought I had hidden so carefully but edited. The forgeries were gone. The paper trail looked clean, and stapled to the top was a note written in my father's neat, precise handwriting. "This is the truth. Walk away before you drown." My hands shook so badly I dropped the envelope. They weren't just countering my moves, they were rewriting the battlefield. That night I called Lily again, desperation in my voice. "They're not just fighting me, Lil. They're erasing me." She sounded terrified. "Marcus, they came by the house. Mom said you've been lying to me for years, that you're jealous and unstable. She begged me not to listen to you." My throat closed. "And did you believe her?" Silence. Then quietly, "I don't know what to believe anymore." That cut deeper than anything else. Because if I lost Lily, I lost the one person who made all this worth it. Still, I knew I couldn't back down. The forged signature was too damning. The truth was too important. But the reality hit me. Evidence wasn't enough. I needed trust. I needed witnesses. I needed someone outside the family who could confirm what I already knew. So I made a choice. I called the journalist again. "Publish," I said. "Even if it destroys me, publish." She hesitated. "Marcus, once this goes out, you can't take it back. They'll come after you harder." I exhaled slowly. "They already have." Before hanging up, she added, "Then brace yourself. Because when the story hits, the storm won't be private anymore. It'll be national." That night, lying awake, I thought about everything I stood to lose. My reputation, my family, even Lily. And for the first time, I asked myself, what if I'm not strong enough to outlast them? What if exposing the truth just buries me deeper? But then another thought broke through. What if staying silent buries me alive? That's when I realized this was no longer about revenge. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about reclaiming the right to exist on my own terms. And right here, I'll say it plainly, don't ever underestimate how far people will go to protect their lies. But also, don't underestimate the power of truth even when it costs you. If you've ever fought against someone trying to silence you, drop a comment below. I want to know I'm not alone in this. As dawn crept through my blinds, I knew the battle had shifted. My parents had fired their first shot in public. Now it was my turn. The war was no longer confined to family dinners or whispered gossip. It was about to explode where everyone could see. The article went live on a Thursday morning. I'll never forget that date. It felt like the ground shifted beneath me. The headline was bold, brutal, impossible to ignore. Family fraud son alleges years of forgery and financial crimes hidden behind suburban facade. By noon, it had already been shared across social media, picked up by smaller outlets, and was climbing toward the front page of local news sites. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing texts from old classmates, coworkers, even strangers who claimed they always suspected something about my parents. For a few short hours, I felt powerful, vindicated. Finally, the truth wasn't locked in my chest. It was out in the open. But by evening, the counterattack began. My parents issued a statement through their attorney calling the article a deliberate smear campaign orchestrated by their troubled son. They painted me as unstable, financially desperate, and willing to burn down my family for attention. And then came the interviews. I watched in horror as my mother sat in a perfectly staged living room, clutching Lily's hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "We've only ever tried to love Marcus," she sobbed into the camera. "But he's been sick for a long time. This is just heartbreaking." That single clip went viral. Suddenly, I wasn't the whistleblower. I was the unstable black sheep tearing apart a loving family. My inbox flooded again, this time not with support, but with venom. Strangers calling me a monster. Threats telling me to crawl back under my rock. And worst of all, Lily. She texted me after the interview aired. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me everything Mom says? You've twisted the truth." I don't know what to believe anymore. My chest ached. I typed and deleted replies for nearly an hour before settling on, "Please, meet me, just once. Let me show you the proof with your own eyes." Her response came hours later, short and uncertain: "Tomorrow." That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the news segment the way my mother's tears had convinced millions. I knew I couldn't compete with her theatrics, but I also knew facts mattered, at least to Lily. The next day, when we met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, she looked exhausted, torn in half. "Marcus," she whispered, "if what you're saying is true, why does it look so clean? Why do the papers Mom showed me have no forgeries, no trail?" That's when I realized the full scope of their game. They hadn't just forged documents, they had prepared for this moment for years, keeping a clean version ready to weaponize against me. I pushed the copies I'd hidden across the table. "Because these," I said firmly, "are the originals. Look at the signatures. Look at the dates. Look at the discrepancies." She studied them, her hands trembling. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across her face, not toward me, but toward them. And that was enough to keep me going. But even as that small victory burned inside me, I knew the war wasn't over. Because while Lily was wavering, my parents were escalating. That night, Derek called me in a panic. "Marcus, I don't know how they did it, but they filed a restraining order. Against you. They're claiming you're stalking them, threatening them. If this sticks, you'll be barred from contacting Lily or even setting foot near their house." My stomach dropped. They weren't just trying to discredit me anymore. They were trying to erase me completely. And here's where I'll pause, because this is the part nobody talks about. When you stand up against the people who raised you, it doesn't just cost you peace. It can cost you your name, your family, even your freedom. If you've ever faced something like this, share your story in the comments. Let's make sure none of us fight alone. As I hung up the phone that night, I felt the walls closing in. The article had pulled the mask off, but the monster behind it wasn't retreating. It was baring its teeth. And I realized with chilling clarity my parents weren't done destroying me. They were only just beginning. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood, a mix of history and judgment. As I stood outside the courtroom doors, I felt like I was walking into my own execution. My parents had filed for a restraining order, painting me as a dangerous, unstable man who couldn't let go of his vendetta. If the judge sided with them, I wouldn't be allowed within 300 feet of Lily. That wasn't just distance, it was a wall, a final severing of the one bond I had left. Inside, the atmosphere was thick. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer perfectly put together. My mother wore pearls, her hands folded demurely in her lap, while my father looked dignified, every inch the picture of respectability. Lily sat behind them, her eyes flicking nervously toward me, then away. When it was my turn to speak, their attorney attacked, first pulling out a stack of papers. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth as silk, "the defendant has a documented history of instability. He has harassed my clients relentlessly, spreading falsehoods to the press and attempting to involve their minor child, his younger sister, in his delusions. This behavior is not only dangerous, it's escalating." Each word felt like a nail being hammered into my coffin. I clenched my fists under the table. When my turn finally came, I stood up, voice shaking at first, but growing stronger as I spoke. "I am not here to harass anyone. I'm here because I discovered years of forgery and fraud. I have documents to prove it, documents that my parents have falsified to erase me. The article you've all seen isn't a smear campaign. It's the truth." The judge looked skeptical, her pen tapping against the bench. "Do you have this proof with you, Mr. Carter?" I swallowed hard. This was the moment everything hinged on. I slid a folder across the table, the originals I'd protected with my life. "These signatures, Your Honor. Compare them to the clean versions they've provided. The dates don't match. The handwriting isn't consistent. This isn't a son lashing out. This is evidence of a crime." For a long moment, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling. The judge's eyes narrowed as she studied the discrepancies. My parents sat rigid, their composure beginning to crack. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. Just as I thought momentum was shifting, my mother's lawyer produced a flash drive. "If we're going to talk about credibility, Your Honor, the defense should see this." The screen flickered to life, showing grainy video footage. It was me, angry, pacing in my apartment, muttering about how I'd destroy them if it's the last thing I do. My stomach dropped. I remembered that night after drinking too much, ranting into my phone's voice memo. Somehow they had it. My mother gasped theatrically, pressing a tissue to her lips. Lily's face went pale. I wanted to scream, to explain. But the judge's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Carter, this does not reflect well on your case." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My parents had always been one step ahead, twisting every weakness into a weapon. But then the break I needed. Derek, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "that footage was obtained illegally. I was with Marcus the night it was recorded. His phone was hacked, and I can prove it." He handed over a report from a cybersecurity firm he'd contacted weeks ago, suspecting we'd need it. The metadata showed the file had been accessed, remotely altered, and distributed. The room buzzed with tension. For the first time, my father's jaw tightened. My mother dropped her act, her eyes flashing with fury. The judge leaned back, tapping her pen again. "This matter has clearly grown beyond the scope of a simple restraining order. I am not prepared to make a ruling today. I will review both sets of evidence before deciding how to proceed. In the meantime, the temporary order stands." It wasn't a win, but it wasn't the loss they'd wanted either. As we filed out of the courtroom, Lily caught my eye. Her face was conflicted, but there was something there, something new. Doubt. And sometimes doubt is all you need to crack the foundation of a lie. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. This was just the prelude to the final war. Because if they were willing to hack my phone, forge my words, and twist the law, what would they do when the truth finally cornered them? The final showdown didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the place I least expected, the community hall where my parents had spent years polishing their reputation as pillars of the neighborhood. They had called a press conference determined to reclaim the narrative once and for all. Rows of chairs were set up, cameras lined the back, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with the metallic buzz of anticipation. My parents walked onto the stage, hand in hand, the very picture of dignity, while Lily trailed behind them, looking pale and uncertain. I stood at the back with Derek, my heart pounding like a drum. This was it. Either I exposed them here in front of everyone, or I lost everything: my name, my sister, my chance at freedom from their grip. My father spoke first, his voice booming with confidence. "We have been maligned, slandered, and attacked by our own blood. But today we stand before you to set the record straight." He held up a stack of documents, waving them like proof of sainthood. "This is the truth. These are the clean records our son refuses to acknowledge." Applause rippled through the room. Neighbors, old family friends, all ready to side with them. I clenched my jaw. But then Lily did something that changed everything. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper at first. Dad. Mom. Why don't these signatures match the ones Marcus showed me? The room stilled. Cameras clicked. My mother's smile faltered. Sweetheart, she said quickly, you don't understand. Marcus has always... No, Lily cut in louder now. I compared them myself. The dates are off. The handwriting is different. You said he was lying, but these papers... They're not real. Gasps echoed across the hall. My parents froze, their perfect mask cracking in real time. That was my cue. I stepped forward, pulling out the folder I'd carried like a shield for months. Everyone deserves to see the truth. I said, my voice steady, though my hands shook. I held up the originals for the cameras, pointing out the discrepancies. Different ink batches, mismatched notary stamps, altered dates. The reporters swarmed, lenses zooming in. I could see doubt spreading like wildfire through the crowd. And then Derek sealed it. He pulled out the cybersecurity report, waving it toward the cameras. These people hacked their own son's phone to fabricate evidence. This isn't a family feud, it's organized fraud. The hall erupted. Shouts, flashes, questions hurled like stones. My parents tried to shout over the noise, but it was too late. Their empire of lies was collapsing in real time, their dignity shredded under the weight of undeniable proof. For the first time in my life, I watched fear flicker in their eyes. Not the fear of being caught by me, but of being caught by everyone. The fallout was swift. Reporters hounded them as they fled the stage. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. And within hours, headlines blasted across every screen. Beloved couple exposed in forgery scandal by their own children. Outside, Lily grabbed my arm, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I should have trusted you sooner. I hugged her tightly, my voice breaking. It's not your fault. They've been shaping the story your whole life. But now you see them for who they are. In the days that followed, investigations, open bank accounts were frozen, and subpoenas flew like daggers. My parents' carefully constructed facade crumbled, leaving only the wreckage of truth behind. And me, for the first time in years, I breathed freely. But here's what I learned, and maybe this is the part that matters most. Freedom doesn't come from waiting for others to validate you. It comes from standing up even when your voice shakes, even when the world calls you crazy. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by truth, by trust, by the people who stand with you when everyone else turns away. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt silenced, erased, or made to doubt your own reality, hear me now, you are not alone. And if this story resonates with you, don't just sit with it. Share your thoughts below, subscribe for more stories like this, and let's keep building a community where no one's truth gets buried. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet. When the dust finally settled, silence became my closest companion. No more courtroom whispers, no more headlines tearing through my life. For the first time, my apartment didn't feel like a bunker, it felt like a home. Lily started visiting often, sometimes bringing over takeout or old photo albums. At first, we flipped through the pictures like archaeologists, unsure of what to make of the faces smiling back at us. But slowly, the weight lifted. We laughed at bad haircuts, at awkward school recitals, at the little moments our parents had tried to rewrite. Those memories, once weapons, became ours again. The garden I had neglected began to bloom. I'd dig my hands into the soil on quiet mornings, planting seeds that would sprout into tomatoes, herbs, wildflowers. Watching them grow reminded me that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens season by season with patience and care. Sometimes I still hear my parents' voices in my head, sharp and cutting. But then I hear Derek's laughter or Lily's quiet thank you when she sets a plate on my counter, and I know I've chosen the right battle. Here's the truth I carry now: breaking free isn't about vengeance. It's about building something stronger in the ruins. It's about learning that peace isn't handed to you. You create it one honest choice at a time. And to you listening right now, if you've stayed with me this long, you're part of that creation. Stick around, subscribe, share your story in the comments, and let's keep growing this garden of truth together. Because every time one of us refuses to be silenced, another seed of freedom takes root. And trust me, the bloom is worth it.